having access is completely separate from a contract discussion. Sometimes they're related, and sometimes we have contracts and we actively seek contracts with providers where that's the right approach. But there are lots of times when the provider is perfectly willing to work with us absent a contract.
Welcome to ClaimTalk. Thanks for joining us. We have with us today two very special guests, two very important people here at ClaimTalk that do so much great work for our clients. And I want them to go ahead and introduce themselves first. Amy Pellegrin.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm Amy Pellegrin, Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer. I have been with ClaimTalk since 2016, so just a little over 8 years. Prior to coming to ClaimTalk, I was in private practice. I am an attorney, and I guess that's kind of obvious. Hence
the title.
But I was in private practice doing civil litigation. Towards the end of my practice before coming here, I did quite a bit of employment law, and that's really what Ben and I connected on was I actually represented the employees quite a bit, and so he knew that would be a good, valuable asset to bring to the table to help members navigate their health plan and some of the issues that revolved around that. So,
tell us about you, Brad.
I joined ClaimTalk 2 years ago. Again, Brad Hansen, I'm the Vice President of Provider Relations. I joined ClaimTalk 2 years ago. I think I'm the elder statesman throughout the office. I clearly have the most gray hair, but I think I'm also the oldest. I've spent about 30 years in healthcare in a variety of capacities, ranging from hospital administrator to clinic administrator. I served for a short time as a in-house counsel. So I like to say I'm the recovering attorney that's on our team. I also have spent a little bit of my career working in public positions in the state of Iowa as a state legislator in Iowa for back when I had all the answers and I could share them with the constituents of Iowa. Fortunately, now that I know I don't have all the answers, I'm no longer in office. But so I've been here 2 years, and it's an incredible ride being on the other side of the negotiating table with providers. I spent a lot of time on the provider side, so it's been a fun ride.
I keep forgetting that I want to interview you about your time in politics. We haven't had time to do that yet, but we will another time, maybe not in this forum.
Well, it's a pretty undistinguished bit of time, but yeah, it was fun.
So being humble, he was the one that helped write the Hawkeye program for
what is that?
Medicaid for children here in Iowa.
The CHIPS program in Iowa. The Iowa option was it's named the Healthy and Well Kids in Iowa program, which is frankly, I'm probably most proud of my work on that bill.
Yeah.
And authoring that. So
wow, thanks for that color. Yeah. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we're focusing in on how we interface with providers. That's why we have Brad and Amy here, is to really give us some insight as to how we at ClaimTalk approach that process. We're probably not super unique, but there are some things that are unique to ClaimTalk that we certainly want to touch on. But Amy and I were talking about this earlier this morning. I just had a call with a potential broker partner last Friday it was, and they were telling me about a case that they already have on what they called reference-based pricing platform. And once I started to get in the weeds with this broker a little bit more, what I realized is that what it actually is a series of several direct contracts with local hospital systems that is essentially being called reference-based pricing. But if there were to be, for example, an employee that went out of state, this was in the Ohio market, they would not have coverage outside of the required emergency situations because the reference-based pricing platform was essentially just a group of direct contracts collected together. And so Amy and I were talking about that because we wanted to make sure that we're talking in very detailed specifics on this episode around the differences between a direct contract and access, which is the term that we prefer to use.
Yeah, a lot of times when we have a prospect, whether it's the employer trying to learn more about the program, or maybe even a broker who's understanding the ClaimTalk way, or maybe being introduced to reference-based pricing for the first time, one of the first questions we hear a lot is, what contracts do you have? Do you have a contract with, Mercy? Do you have a contract, naming the large health systems or the hospital that they believe is most important to their client or their program? And you always have to tiptoe around not offending the person you want business from right away. But the problem is they're asking the wrong question. It's not about contracts. It's about access. And so we try in those conversations to educate them. Well, we can tell you all about our contracts. Yes, we have contracts. We have contracts all over the place. But what you really want to know is, where can your members be seen? Where do they have access? Because those two lists are not the same.
And I always joke. So I was in graduate school 30 years ago, and I remember taking this course in healthcare law, and everybody's in this great big lecture hall, and the professor's up front, and class is getting settled. The instructor starts talking for the very first time in the semester, and all of a sudden the door bursts open, and some student walks in and screams at the top of his or her lungs, "Informed consent is not a form," and then walks out, slams the door shut, and the professor said, "Now, if you don't remember a single thing from this class, I want you to remember that informed consent is not a form." So I sort of, that's an analogy to what Amy and is saying. The point, of course, is just having a piece of paper that says something doesn't necessarily guarantee the thing that you think it does. So like having a contract doesn't necessarily guarantee that you have access. And likewise, probably more commonly, just because you don't have a contract doesn't mean you don't have access to the provider. And so, to Amy's point, having access is completely separate from a contract discussion. Sometimes they're related, and sometimes we have contracts, and we actively seek contracts with providers where that's the right approach. But there are lots of times when the provider is perfectly willing to work with us absent a contract because we pay claims on time, we tell them what's going to be paid, and they're perfectly comfortable, and we can go on that topic a lot. The incentives have certainly changed with the No Surprises Act and the healthcare transparency on why that might be. But the point is, don't think in terms of contracts. Think in terms of access. You market after market after market. Some provider is in network and then suddenly they're out of network, and those don't necessarily line up with dates that a provider selects a plan. And those dates might be all over the place. And suddenly those patients, those members are out there wandering around saying, "Gee, I don't have access to that provider anymore. And that's what I had a month ago." And there's a protracted public fight going on between a large payer and a provider system. And members are caught up in that wash. And the result is no access.
Yeah. And to that point as well, something that you just said that's important to distinguish as well is when members get caught up in that, and there's one going on in my home state right now. It's a big battle over reimbursement rates between a major insurance payer and a healthcare system that's widely used. It's also a women's health forward system, and it's the only one we have really in Indiana that's pretty large. So that's large enough to create a lot of access. And so I was discussing with a broker friend, what's unfortunate for the employee in that situation too is not only are they caught in between this reimbursement skirmish, but they have no advocate for themselves. They don't have someone that's on their side trying to go to that provider and talk some sense or come to an active agreement. Instead, they're just caught sort of in the fray, which is something that's unique to what we do here as well, is that we have a really active provider relations and advocacy arm that makes sure that our members don't fall victim to an otherwise really unfortunate circumstance.
One of the things we talked about when Brad was being interviewed is, can you come to this side? Are you ready to come to our side? And can you take your provider hat off and help us make a better program on our side? And I think what we've learned is that it wasn't about taking your provider hat off. You've probably left it on and utilized all that information, that experience to help us navigate to become better, because it's about those relationships, right? And so I love to hear you talk about, just navigating the health systems and providers and learning so much about all the different structures that exist depending on size and geographic market that allows us to navigate those with or without a contract.
Sure. One example kind of to the point we were making about the contracts, I worked as a clinic administrator for a long time in Omaha, Nebraska, and we were two competing systems, much like other similar-sized communities. the two systems were competing, and both had contracts with a large BUCA player, say Blue Cross.
Hypothetically, of course.
What's that?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically speaking, of course. Well, the other side of the street, the other system in town, got into this really public battle about their contract. This contract got terminated. Well, I was running a good piece of the clinic operation, and lo and behold, we started getting patients coming to our system, which is a great thing. We were all excited about the volume, but pretty soon that volume, there was so much volume, and these patients were so upset that they had to change providers because of a decision, this public fight between the hospital administration and the Blue Cross plan in the market. They got to us. We did our best to accommodate them, and then we realized those patients were making a permanent change to their healthcare provider choice
Relationship.
and the relationship. And so, pretty clear to me, those folks, there was no contract. The contract went away. Those folks didn't feel like they had access, and we made double sure they had access to our providers, and we made it as convenient as possible. And not long after that, we started getting phone calls from physicians saying, I'm going to change systems. I don't want to work for that side of the street. I want to work for this side of the street. And so, to me, again, you have to think in terms of access, and it's important to know the contracts that are out there. But at the end of the day, that's not really what the question you should be asking for your members.
Amy, can you provide us some color around what we mean when we say access? How do we go about getting access for our employees and employers?
Yeah. So, access is access to care, right? So if you have a provider and you need services performed, then we want you to be able to choose your provider and receive those services. Under the ClaimTalk solution, so what access means is that the provider is willing to submit claims to the plan. That may be under a written contract agreement. It may not be. By educating providers, we help them understand what it means to submit claims. Not every provider requires education. Most providers are sophisticated enough. They take your ID card. They look to see where to submit claims. And as long as they understand that they're going to get paid, they're going to submit those claims. So often, as we've been talking about today, everybody assumes that the only way you're going to have access to care is if you can be assured that there's something in writing behind the scenes, but that's really not the case. We're just so ingrained in the network scenario where you have to look at a list and make sure that it's on that list, and that means there's a contract in place that we don't know how to think outside that box. And so a good solution that includes access to all providers is really what we're trying to create here, and what we think is the best comprehensive program under a reference-based pricing platform.
Yeah, and we really approach the market like a local healthcare market. So the strategy that works in Omaha, Nebraska may not be the strategy that works in Indianapolis, Indiana. Different provider competitive landscapes, different demographics, different provider characteristics. So you really have to tailor it to the market. But through it all, you really have to be seeking partnership with the providers. When Amy and Bruce and Ben were wondering if I could take my provider hat off, I was on the other side saying, I wonder if they'll be okay if I don't want to have a scorched earth strategy with providers, because I think, candidly, that's a short-term win strategy that doesn't serve the members well long-term. What serves them well is being upfront, meeting proactively with the providers, trying to forge that relationship, look for common ground. I was just in a small Midwest community here not too long ago, where we sat down with this. It was a one hospital town, and a group of us, Danielle, you were there. We sat down with that provider, and we learned that they had some strategies that they were employing that really fit very nicely with what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
So we could actually help them be a catalyst to achieving the strategy that they were endeavoring to implement. So that was a perfect opportunity for us to be a partner in what they wanted to do. We'll negotiate hard with the providers. We made no apologies for negotiating tough, but once we do that, we want that relationship to stand the test of time for those members, and not be a 1 year sort of proposition.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really important, that it really bears repeating. that you said earlier is that the concept of having a short-term payment settled, we got through this singular claim, is really short-sighted, because we really want to develop these partnerships with the providers long-term, so that when they see ClaimDoc on an ID card, there's no problem. It is great. We have a good relationship with them. We already met with Brad. We know what they're trying to do, and we're all on the same team, which is to get our members care and make sure that everyone gets paid appropriately. So I think that concept of the long-term strategy was very new to me when I started learning about ClaimDoc.
Yeah, and the relationships, the form of the relationship really sort of follows a continuum. Everything from a traditional global contract to a series of single case agreements, or even a regular cadence of just phone calls to the access people at the health system from our member advocates. There's lots of ways to do it. There's no one perfect way, and we've not, and I'm grateful to the company for not limiting us and saying, well, it has to be one way, because candidly, that will ultimately not serve members well when we're limiting it.
Those who have been in the industry a long time may remember a very public fight that occurred in Omaha with one of our friendly competitors. And so that scorched earth approach, it lasts with the providers, and totally understands sometimes that's necessary in certain markets. It absolutely is, and we're willing to do it. But when that is the approach up front, it can be very damaging long term to ever come back from that. And so, when you're having these conversations with providers, whether it's up front about a single patient, or our program happens to have the Pave the Way process, which also reaches out prior to services and introduces the plan, and just having those friendly touches to the provider community that makes them understand that we want to work collaboratively for members. We want the experience for patients to be positive, just like they do, and that we want to be a friendly party to them, to that conversation. Then if there is a dispute down the road, let's say they thought they were going to accept, and then they decide, actually, our managed care department has decided we need a contract. That's part of our contracting strategy. We've already set the groundwork to have a conversation that's friendly and that we can build from, as opposed to being argumentative or adversarial up front. So I think that's really important to building that relationship, to have that longevity in the market. Yeah,
and that's the kind of thing, that example is the kind of thing that allows the relationship to evolve over time. And a lot of times the response we get out of providers is kind of similar knee-jerk as to who are your contracts with from clients, is how many covered lives do you have in our market? And I know immediately when I hear that question, now we probably are dealing with a provider that is saying, well, I'm going to give my deepest discounts to the one that's largest, and the ones that are smallest are going to get a smaller discount. And I understand that logic. That's prevalent. There's all kinds of reasons to look at it that way. On the other hand, if you're a provider and you say, well, if I'm only going to give the deep discount to the big one, guess what's going to happen? The big one's going to get bigger, and the small ones are going to have to go away because they're not going to be competitive. And then suddenly you got a monopoly. And how's that worked out for you?
Right.
How do you like negotiating with a monopoly? And so we have a lot of providers, and it's happening more and more frequently, who are saying, we want a competitive insurance carrier landscape. And the way to do that is to be aggressive with people that are good partners. And so that's why it behooves us, ultimately it behooves our members, for us to stand there ready to partner with them in ways that make sense for them. And that might look totally different in one market to the other. I mean, they're different issues, and we're always looking for, angles and opportunities to make that happen. And the beauty of ClaimDoc is we're small and nimble enough, and we've got enough smart people that if I go out and make a promise like that, I know we have smart people that can figure out how to make that come to fruition. Lord knows I couldn't make that come to fruition, but I know we've got the right people and the right team to do that.
Yeah, when I was interviewing for the second brokerage that I worked for, I was getting ready to jump out of the nest of my family firm and go find another place to land. And I interviewed with the practice leader of a regional firm in Indianapolis, and this firm held most of the hospital systems in the state as clients. And so when she asked me, what kind of technical benefits things do you like to do? I immediately said, well, preference-based pricing. And she said, well, first of all, you can't write that here, and here's why. And obviously it makes sense. And second of all, that will never work until you can get the provider at the table.
Yeah.
And she was so, I think, for our market, very forward-thinking and sage in saying that. And so I told that story in the meeting we had with a little local hospital system recently, because I do think it's important that might be the missing component that we didn't have 12 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were trying to do the scorched earth strategy. And the other problem with the scorched earth strategy that I found is that it's created a lot of strong opinions that RBP doesn't work. That reference-based pricing or fair payment solutions or network replacement, it just doesn't work in this market for these reasons. And my response to that recently has been, maybe in the past, but I think that we understand a better way.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of providers, if we do get that response up front, once we explain how our program works and how we're different, I think that many are coming around. But it definitely developed into talking points, even from like the hospital association. There are certain states where we still have that battle because of that. I kind of want to flip, because we're talking a lot about scorched earth, but the other side of that is everything should be contracted, right? I know we started off with that conversation and access, but I think that the thing not to lose is that there's that middle ground. And we're seeing a lot of brokers and clients implementing those layers. Maybe it's different products for direct contracting, trying to get that implemented. The problem with some of those products is that they don't take care of some of the toughest situations, right? Some of the toughest conditions, or maybe a health system that's not participating. Often it's going to be the more scheduled procedures. So yes, there are upsides to that, but that's only going to fix a small piece of it, right? You need a program that's still going to be able to address all of the needs that your membership is going to have. And so it's just a Band-Aid, really, I guess, as I would describe it. But it seems that that's what we're hearing, right? That's how we started this conversation. Who do you have contracts with? And that's the current push, is direct contracting. And providers do have that desire to engage with the community outside of the network, right? They want that direct relationship with employers. They want to feel like the employers are putting the money in their pocket as opposed to padding the bukas. But you have to find a balance. If you're contracting everything, you're no longer seeing the savings that you're going to have with a program that really balances that.
Yeah.
Well, and that really starts with our Pave the Way program, because it's a very different thing for a provider to get a phone call from a provider relations specialist in, West Des Moines, Iowa, calling and saying, "Hey, we've got X number of lives, and we'd like to see if we could have access." That's a different discussion than one of our member advocates calling and saying, "Hey, Mary's been a patient of your office for the last 20 years. She'd like to continue coming to see you. Is that going to work? And will you submit claims?" And easily forgotten in all of this is that healthcare is local. Like, we can have all this consolidation in the world and all of these systems coming together, and their billing departments now are centrally located hundreds of miles away from where the provider is. But at the end of the day, it's still about the patient coming to that reception desk to see that doctor in that local community. And so there's an opportunity, and that's part of the relationship, is make sure we stay connected there. And that's our program, not to be too biased about, but our program uses those relationships to maintain the access that our members want. There are other times, and you and I were both involved in one of these, where there's a local connection between the employer and the hospital at a corporate level.
Yeah.
And those hospitals, most hospitals, want to work very closely with their corporate communities. And so that's an opportunity to use that relationship to get in the door and stay in the door, candidly. Because we get the access initially, now we got to prove ourselves.
Right.
And we got to prove ourselves as a worthy partner. And if we do that, we'll keep the access. If we don't, then what's going to happen to us is what we deserve.
Yeah, I think that's so key, is remembering that the most important part is the integrity to do what we said we were going to do.
Yep.
And maintain accountability and use our TPA partners as well. Yep. in that process.
I think making sure that our employers don't feel like they're being forced into a mold, right? Every employer is different. Their membership is different. That means that the market touch is going to be different depending on that membership. And that's really what you have to keep in mind for it to be effective. And that takes a little bit more work.
Yes.
So
we're down in the weeds in a lot of communities, and we'll meet with small hospitals and rural communities. And I was up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, meeting with providers. Very lovely town, though.
Right. It's not glamorous. The work is glamorous.
But
yeah.
Great restaurants in Grand Forks. I loved them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's a great Mexican restaurant up there. It was outstanding.
All right. Good little dining scene. Good to know. Well, awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us today. And we appreciate your expertise. I know our clients and their employees appreciate your expertise more than just about anybody. So thanks for that. If you enjoyed our podcast today or you learned something new, please like, share, and subscribe on whatever platform you're using to tune in and talk to us. Thanks for joining us on ClaimTalk. We'll see you next time.